Hello everyone, today we will create a Node app. So let's see what we can do. Let's say we want a node, and let's pass the content PPP, and let's say we don't want to have the content anymore and just save it as it is. And we can also delete the node. So let's start by deleting these things from the main activity. And let's create the first package called data and the second one called domain. The main package contains the business logic, and here we will have the repositories, the models, and in the data we manage the data. So this will contain the repository implementation, the database, the network requests if you have. So let's start by creating a package called local, and inside of it we will create an entity package, and let's create the node entity. I'll take this with entity, and let's say the primary key is an ID of nullable integer. We will have the title. Oops, I forgot the comma, and the content. Now let's create another package called DAO, and inside of it we will have the node DAO, and this is an interface annotated with DAO, and this stands for data access object, and this will perform the CRUD operations on our database. And CRUD stands for create, replace, update, and delete, and the first function will be the one that will get all the nodes, get all nodes. Let's delete the suspend because we don't need this, because we are returning a flow of type list of node entity, and we need to annotate this with a query, and this will say select everything from node entity, and now we need to get node by ID, and we pass the ID, and this will be returning a node entity, and this will be a suspend function. And now we need to annotate this with I'll make it on multiple lines, and let's say select everything from node entity where ID equals the ID that we passed in the function. Now we need to create another suspend function that will insert node, and we pass the node entity, and this can be nullable, so let's put the question marks. And now we need to annotate this with insert, and on conflict strategy dot replace. Now let's create a suspend function that will delete our node entity. Let's annotate this with delete, and the last function we need is to update the node, and annotate this with update. Now let's create another file in the local package called node database, and this is an abstract class annotated with database, and here we need to pass the version 1, and the entities we only have the node entity class, and we need to create an abstract value that will be our DAO node DAO. And we also need to create a companion object that will have our database name. So name equals node db. Now let's go to the domain package and create another package called model, and inside of it we will create the node, and this will have the same arguments. So val ID of type nullable integer, the default is null. We have the title, default is an empty string, and the content as well. maybe you are wondering why I'm doing this, and I'm doing this because the UI layer cannot access directly the data layer, and it can access only the domain layer. So the node, it's basically a class that can be accessed by the UI layer instead of using the node entity directly. Now let's create another package called repository, and this will have the functions that we have in the DAO. So node repository, and this is an interface node repository, and let's write the functions. Get all nodes, and this will be returning a flow of type a list of nodes from the domain. Suspend function get node by ID and pass the ID, and the result will return a nullable node. Suspend function insert node. Let's duplicate this and say delete node and update node. Now let's go back to the data and create another package called repository, and here we will define the repository implementation. So node repository implementation, and this will inherit from the node repository, and let's implement the members. And we also need the DAO in our constructor, and now let's implement the get all nodes. So DAO dot get all nodes dot map nodes and nodes dot map, and we need to convert the node entity to a node. So we need to create another package called mapper. Let's collapse the local and create node mapper file, and this will contain the node entity dot as external model, and it will return a node, and it's node with the parameters from the node entity, and node dot to entity, and it will return a node entity equals node entity, and we do the same thing. So I'm copying the parameters, and now we can go back to the node repository implementation and say it dot to as external model. Now we can I forgot to say return. Now we can access the DAO, get node by ID, pass the ID, and say question mark as external model, and return the result. Now let's insert the node, insert node, pass the node dot to entity, and DAO dot delete node dot to entity, and the last function is the update. So DAO dot update and update node dot to entity. Now we can create another package called DI, and this will contain the dependency injection, and let's say app module, and annotate this with module install in singleton component class, and we need to provide something. So provides singleton, and fun provide node database, a database, and I need the application context. Okay, and let's say equals room dot database builder. We pass the context, the node database class, and node database dot name, and dot build. And it's something wrong here. I forgot to inherit from the room database, and I think it's okay. and I need to say .java. And the last thing we need to provide, provides singleton font provide node repository, and we need to pass the database as a parameter database, and we will return a node repository, and this will be a node repository implementation, and we need to pass the DAO that we will get from the database. And now we need to set up Dagger Hilt, so create an application class node application, and inherit from the application, and annotate this with Hilt Android app. We need to go to the main activity and annotate this with Android entry point. And the last thing we need to do is to go to the manifest file and say name is the node application. Now let's go to the UI package and collapse the theme and create a package called screen, and let's create the package called node list, and inside of it we will create the node list view model, and this is a class and it inherits from the view model. Annotate this with Hilt view model, and let's say inject constructor, and we will inject the repository. And now we need to create the node list, and this is the repository .get all nodes .state in. The scope is the view model scope. Started is sharing started while subscribed, and this will listen when it will get the first value. And the last thing we need to do is to say that initial value is an empty list. And now we can create the node list screen, and this is a file that will have a node list screen composable. And let's say scaffold, and opting for the scaffold, we get the padding, and let's create a lazy column, and this will have an item that's the header, so text notes, and make this title material theme dot typography title large. Let's format the code, and let's also create the items, but we need to pass the list first, so node list, and this is a list of node. And now we can say items and get the one that says list, node list, and get the node. And now let's create a list item, remove the material3 import, and the headline text is the title of the node, so node.title, title, not the content. And we will have the supporting text, and this is the node.content, and max lines is, let's say, 2, and overflow text overflow ellipsis, and this will display the dots when it will overflow. And let's make the title a little bit bigger, so style material theme typography, and let's say title medium, and let's format the code. Now we need to add the padding to the lazy column, so padding values, and let's add the start 20 dp. Let's import the dp, and this 20 dp top is equal to 15 dp plus padding, calculate top padding, and bottom is 15 dp plus padding, calculate bottom padding. Now we need to add the on node click function, and we need to pass the node, and let's add this to the list item, so modifier equals modifier clickable, on click is equal to on node click. Okay. It's equal to on node click, and we pass the node. And let's format the code a little. Now let's create the node screen node, and let's create the node state, and this is a data class, and this will have the ID, which is a nullable one, the title, and the content, not the description string. Now let's create the node event sealed interface, and this will have a data class that says title change, and we pass a new value, and this will be a string node event. Let's duplicate this and say description content, not description, and an object that says save and node event, and one that says navigate back, and it's a node event too. Now let's create the view model, and it's called node view model, and this inherits from the view model class, and it's a Hilt view model. And let's say inject constructor, and it's a private value. We want the node, the repository, that is the node repository. Now let's create a private value that is our state, mutable state flow node state, and we are doing this because we don't want the UI to access directly the state and change it, and we will have a state value that is accessed by UI, so as state flow. And we also need to create another value that is an event, but we need to create a class for this. So let's go to the UI package and create a util package, and this will contain the UI event sealed interface, and this will have the object, not an object, a data class that says navigate, and pass the route, and it's an UI event, and navigate back. And now we can go back to the node view model and say private val event channel UI event, and through this channel we will listen to the events and we will trigger UI events. So let's say val event equals event as receive as flow, and now create a function called on event, and this will be on node event, not an UI event. And let's say when event, and let's add the remaining branches, and let's say the content change is state dot update it dot copy content equals event dot value. The title is state dot update it dot copy. Title is equal to event dot value. Now let's create a helper function that will send an event, and let's pass the event of type UI event. Let's open the block and say view model scope because it's a suspending function, and let's say underscore event dot send and pass the event, and now we can call it in the navigate back. So send event navigate back. Now let's implement the save function, and this will check if state dot value ID is null. We'll insert a repository dot insert node, and let's create the node. Node is ID equals let's separate the state and create another value. So val state equals, to not say dot value every time, so state.id, state.id on title, state.title, and content equals state.content. And we need to wrap the whole thing in a viewModel scope because we are launching some suspend functions. So let's say let's add the else block that says repository dot update node, and we'll update the current node. So node equal node, and we pass the ID, state dot ID, and the other things. So state dot title and content, state content. Let's also create a separate variable for this because we're just repeating. So node equals node, and pass the node here, node, and let's also add the node here. Now let's go back to the event because I forgot to say object delete node, and it will inherit from the node event. And let's also implement this event. So this will say repository dot delete node, and let's copy the node from here, and let's also wrap this with viewModel scope, and let's move this up, and let's also copy the state from here and pass the node to the delete function. I forgot to say that after these things we need to navigate back, so node UI event navigate back and also navigate back from the delete. And let's go to the node and create another class, a file called node screen, and this will be a node screen composable. Let's create a scaffold and get the padding from it and opt in for this and say column, and let's say modifier dot fill max size, import the modifier, and let's also say padding, pass the padding from the scaffold, and let's add some extra horizontal padding, 20 dp, and some vertical padding, vertical equals 15 dp. Now let's create two outline text fields, outlined text field, and let's pass the state. So state node state on event, and pass the node event unit. And now let's say the value is state dot title, and on value change is on event node event dot title change, and pass the new value. Now we can also copy this and say state.content and content change. Let's add the button. Let's add a box first, box that will fill the whole width, and it will say content alignment dot center and button, and let's say text save, and this will be on event node event dot save, and let's also say that modifier equals modifier fill max width, and this will occupy half of the screen. And the last thing we need to do is to create the top bar. So top bar center align top bar, and let's say navigation icon. It's an icon button. Icons dot rounded dot navigate arrow back, and the content description will be navigate back. Let's put this on separate lines, and let's say the on click is on event event dot navigate back, and we need an action. And this will be our delete button. So icons dot rounded dot delete, and let's say content description is delete. Put this on separate lines, and let's say the on click is on event dot delete delete node. And the last thing we need to do is to go to the main activity and create a nav controller. And remember, nav controller, this will help us to navigate through the screens. Let's create a nav host and pass the nav controller, and the start destination, and this is an empty string for now. And let's go to the util package and create an object that says route, and we have the node list and a node, and we need to say id equals id. Now we need to go back to the node view model because I forgot something. This should be private, and we need the private val saved state handle, and this will give us the ID from the route. So save state handle dot get a string, and this is the ID, and let's say ID equals it.toInt, and we need to call the repository dot get node by ID and pass the ID. Let's also check if it's not null, and we need to open a block, so view model scope launch, and let's say node, and let's update the state with the new node. So state update it.copy, and say title is equal to node.title, the ID is equal to node.id, and the last thing we need is the content, which is equal to node.content, and let's replace this with screen state because we are already using the it. So let's say screen state.copy, and now let's go back to the main activity and set up the first screen, pass the route, so route dot node list, and open the block. Let's get the view model by saying view model equals Hilt view model, and this will give us the node view model, node list view model, and let's say node list is equal to view model dot node list collect as state with lifecycle, and let's replace the equals with by, and now we need to say node list screen and pass the node list, and let's format the code and open a block here, and let's say nav controller dot navigate, and let's say route dot node dot replace, and now we will replace the ID that is in curly braces with the it dot ID dot toString. Now I remember that I forgot to say that the node list screen scaffold has a floating action button, and oops, this will need the function on add node click. This is a unit function, and let's replace onClick with on add node click, and let's add an icon, icons.rounded.add, and the content description is add node. And let's put this on separate lines and go back to the main activity, and let's add the on add node click nav controller dot navigate to route dot node. Let's also replace the start destination with a node list and put this on separate lines, and we need to create the node screen. So route equals route dot node. Now let's get the view model. So view model is equal to Hilt view model, but it's the node view model this time. We need to get the state, and this is the let's replace this with by view model dot state dot collect as state with lifecycle. Now let's open a launched effect block, because we need to listen to the events that are sent by our channels. So let's say view model dot event dot collect, and let's get the event. And when the event is navigate back, oops, not that navigate back, we need to say nav controller dot pop backstack, and else we don't do anything. And the last thing we need to do is to say that node screen is it needs the state and the on event that we can pass with these double dots, and pass the on event function. And let's format the code, put these on separate lines, and let's try to run the app and see if it works. I forgot to add the placeholders for the text fields. So let's say placeholder equals text title, and let's copy the placeholder and paste it here for the content. And let's also add some vertical spacing, so arrangement dot spaced by 10 dp. And let's run the app and see how it looks. Let's try to add a node. Let's say test1, and let's just save it, and after that we will update it. And let's say content is test content. This works fine, and let's also delete the node. Okay, everything works. So if you like this video, follow me for more content like this, and I also have a blog on which I post extra content, and see you next time.